Welcome back into CBS Sports HQ. So either you love it or you love to hate it. And I think Pete Prisco actually likes the latter there. Pete Prisco's Top 100. It is finally here, his Top 100 players heading into the 2021 season. I will tell you there are only 4 from his 2020 list that remain in the top 10. And then there's one guy who fell like 60 spots. So it is time for the reveal, which, by the way, you can check out on CBSSports.com. Let us know what you think on social media because people are already up in arms. So there it is, the top 10. Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Donald, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Travis Kelce, TJ Watt, Devontae Adams, Russell Wilson, Myles Garrett, and Josh Allen. The 4 that were still in the top 10 from last season, Mahomes, Donald, Rodgers, and Wilson. The rest are newbies. All right, we are very excited for this segment. Let's welcome in Pete Prisco here with me on set. He's already smiling like a devilish grin. Danny Kanell, Bryant McFadden here. Before we dive into what these guys says is wrong with your list, the biggest challenge in making this, and you say you go over this a lot. You take guys in, you put them back out. What's the deal?
Yeah, that top 10 probably was changed about 8 times, 9 times. And when I go back and talk to guys and then go back and watch tape, I move guys in and out. Myles Garrett was one of those guys. I initially didn't have him in the top 10, went back and watched some stuff, talked to some personnel guys, and then moved them back into the top 10. So it's challenging. And the real challenge is because I think there's a big middle class of guys in this list. You could take player number 40 and move him to 20, and you probably wouldn't have much of an argument. That's how much I think there's a middle class in this league now.
Are you satisfied with it, though?
Yes,
like
absolutely.
You like it. You
absolutely,
like the list.
I like
He's
the list.
willing to stand by
Yeah,
it.
it's my list. I made it. I like it.
All right, this is what Danny and B-Mac think. We did ask on social media, on Twitter. You can still go weigh in there. The biggest snub in Pete Prisco's top 100 is 41.7%. Baker Mayfield coming in at number 1. Marshawn Lattimore coming in at number 2. Then James Bradbury, followed up by Josh Jacobs. I'm hearing B-Mac in my ear. Would you like to say something, my friend?
Yeah, I highlighted Baker Mayfield. I'm glad, you know, the folks that chimed in, they're rocking with me. But James Bradbury is another name that's left off this list. James Bradbury balled out for the Giants. Giants fans need to stand up and attack Pete Prisco like the Steelers fans did last year when he left Micah Fitzpatrick off his list. And I'm so happy to see you have Micah on your list because, ooh, Steeler Nation ready to attack you once again. But James Bradbury, 44 tackles, 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 8 PBUs. He was second in the NFL in that stat, tied for second. You got Darius Williams, who played real good football opposite of Jalen Ramsey. But guess who he was covering? Most opposing offenses number 2 guy, because Jalen follows the number 1 guy. You know who follows the number 1 guy for the New York Football Giants? James Bradbury. And then you have L'Jarius Sneed, the talented young corner from Kansas City, who I love. I love his game. But you have him in your top 100, 31 tackles, 3 interceptions, only 7 PBUs. James Bradbury has better numbers than Sneed. James Bradbury basically has better numbers or right there with Williams, and he follows the opposing offense's number 1 pass catcher. And last year, he pretty much locked them down. So to have James Bradbury left off your list is a total issue for me outside of Baker. Baker's my number 1. That's my number 1 gripe. My number 2 gripe, Bradbury. You got to be on the list. Giants fans attack Pete right now.
I really thought he was going to get mad at me because I put his cousin on the list. I didn't expect James Bradbury to be fire up B-Mac.
I didn't want to be too predictable because when I saw that, I said, oh, I know what Pete's thinking already. I'm going to attack him because Pat Pete's not on the list. But I didn't want to be predictable. So I came from a different angle. I didn't come from the strong side of the blitz. I came from the weak side blitz.
And by the way, I've had Patrick Peterson high on this list for many years. He did not play to that last year. And knowing Patrick Peterson the way I do, he'd probably be the first one to admit it.
All right, Pete Prisco, thank you so much. By the way, go after Pete on Twitter. He loves it. He may block you, but he loves it. Speaking of Patrick Peterson and Bryant McFadden, if you didn't know, they have a podcast. It is awesome. All things covered. Make sure to download and follow. All right, so Danny there agrees with your 1 and 2, which, by the way, same order as last year is your list. Number 1, Patrick Mahomes. Number 2, Aaron Donald. B-Mac, do you agree with Aaron Donald coming in at number 2?
No question. Aaron Donald is probably the most dominating force we've seen in the game of football in quite some time. I mean, he has that Lawrence Taylor-ish, what he means to his team and what he means to the league as far as just being able to rip apart opposing offensive linemen that he sees week in and week out. He's been so consistent, and I'm just happy to see Aaron getting the respect that he deserves. When you talk about the top 100 players, clearly, you know, that number one, it seems to always trend to a quarterback. And I agree with Pete. I agree with Danny. I mean, Pat Mahomes is the clear-cut number one guy. But when you talk about the second best player in the National Football League over the last 2, 3, 4 years, it has been Aaron Donald. The job he's been able to do, receiving so much attention. I mean, he's commanding 2 blockers every play, and he's still dominating people. He's the most feared guy in the game. Hands down. He is the most feared guy in the game. It's almost anytime you see number 99 in the lineup with his hand in the dirt, you're holding your breath, especially if you're rooting for the team he's going against, because he can single-handedly disrupt any offense.
Couple things here, real quick. Aaron Donald, all you need to see about his value is to look at the playoff game last year against Green Bay. Remember, he was banged up. He was playing on one leg. They ran all over them in that game. That tells you how great he is, not just as a pass rusher, but also as a guy who can play the run. Number 2, we talk about quarterbacks and how this list is loaded with quarterbacks. You have to take into account that this isn't just based on position value. If it was based on position value, I'd probably have a top 10 with all quarterbacks. But you have to take into account how a player plays his position, which is why, you know how I hate running backs, but Derrick Henry was phenomenal last year. I didn't put him in the top 10, but he had an outstanding season. So if I had a real list for how I feel value-wise, I'd have running backs down near the 90s. But since this is how you played and not based on position value, I have Derrick Henry high up on the list.
I appreciate the tease because we're going to talk about running backs here in a second because apparently you like them now. But let's get into some other things here. So Travis Kelce cracked your top 5. Last year he came in at 20. I will tell you one of the top Instagram comments already is that Travis Kelce is not a top 5. B-Mac, let's start with you on Travis Kelce coming in at 5. Do you agree with this?
Nah, I don't agree with Pete. I mean, when you look at the top 5 selections for his top 100 players in the top 5, I think that is the only argument. Now, I get why Pete decided to have Travis Kelce in the top 5. He was unbelievable last year, and I believe he will have the same success that we saw in 2020. But when you look at the best prolific elite pass catcher from last year, if you're talking about pass catchers, it's Davante Adams. Davante Adams was a one-man wrecking crew. He had 115 receptions, over 1,300 yards, and 18 touchdowns. 18 touchdowns. It's safe to say because of the lack of star power that's surrounding him in that Green Bay Packers offense, he receives double the attention that Travis Kelce receives in Kansas City because he has more skillful players surrounding him a la Tyreek Hill. So that's the one argument that I have in the top 5. Travis Kelce clearly is a top 10 player with ease, but having him in the top 5 definitely it raised my eyebrow to say the least.
Well, he almost led the league in receiving yards. I mean, think about that. As a tight end, that's special. And you could make an argument, and there was some guys I talked to, some receiver coaches who said Diggs should be the receiver that be first in the top 10 and not Adams. You can't make any argument whatsoever at the tight end position. The guy dominated last year like we haven't seen a tight end in terms of yards do in a long time. So that's why I put him in the top 10 and top 5. I think he's special. I think he earned the right to be there. And
it's your list. You get to make it.
That's right.
Pete, when you walked in, you said, what are Danny and B-Mac's biggest issues? Because they emailed us, they let us know their thoughts. And then you said, no, I want to be surprised. So I will tell you, one of the top things on Danny's list, TJ Watt, coming in at number 6. He said he was too high. Last year you had him at 16. Led the NFL with 15 sacks this past season. Danny, why do you say he's too high?
So I think, and Pete alluded to it earlier when he was talking about Myles Garrett, should he be a top 10 player, and he's got him just a few slots below. I do think TJ Watt has really benefited from the play of Bud Foster on the other side of him. And then when they lost Bud Foster, you saw those some of those stats start to drop off a little bit. So I'm curious to see what he does without him on the other side of that line, and I'm curious to see what he does. Now, he's an incredible young player, but if you go back to the players out there, who would the players not want to block? I think they would choose Myles Garrett every single time because of the physical specimen that he is. I don't think T.J. Watt strikes fear into the eyes of players like Myles Garrett does. So I think he's an incredible player, but I would have Myles Garrett as the edge above him. Statistics have to come and consistency has to come, but I think I'd take Myles Garrett every time over T.J. Watt.
Well, since T.J. Watt's playing opposite Bud Foster, who coached defense, he coached defensive players at Virginia Tech. He had a heck of a year. You met Bud Dupree, right?
Yes,
Come on,
Bud
Danny.
Dupree.
Bud Foster. If Bud Foster's playing opposite you, you had a hell of a year, T.J. Watt.
He retired a couple years ago, too. You know who I meant.
But look, T.J. Watt had a phenomenal season last year. He was second in Defensive Player of the Year running, and I think some people said he should have won it. So, I love Myles Garrett. I really do. But T.J. Watt was outstanding last year. He earned this spot. Sorry, Danny.
All right, now it's time to get into the running backs here. And I will say that was the second thing on Danny's email. The very first thing on Danny's email was, wait, Pete loves running backs now? Because despite your aversion to running backs or paying them, you had two in your top 20. So you had Derrick Henry coming in at 11, Zeke coming in at 17. Explain yourself.
Well, here's the thing when you look at these running backs. It's not position value, like I said before. If it were, we wouldn't have any of them in the top 100 because the position isn't of value in the NFL. Derrick Henry rushed for 2,000 yards last season in an era where people aren't running the ball as much. That's a phenomenal year. And again, people will push back on me on this one thinking he should have been in the top 10. He was an MVP candidate. He carried that team last year. That's why I put him where he was.
Danny, B-Mac, either one of you want to chime in on the running backs?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I actually think it's about time. Now, I know his philosophy is you don't pay them as much, which I'm okay with because I agree with him on that one. But I think, too, what you have to value here, maybe it's not positional value, it's value of what they mean to their franchise. If you take a Dalvin Cook off the Minnesota Vikings, if you take Derrick Henry off of the Titans, look at the drop in production that it would mean to the overall offense as a whole and the value they bring to their quarterbacks respectively. So from that impact and like what they mean to their organization, that's where I'm like, all right, it's good to see Pete's actually appreciating these running backs.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what Danny was just stating, I think Cook should be higher. He should be in the top 15. And if you had Derrick Henry inside the top 10, I would be okay with that as well because the value that they brought to their offense clearly was well documented. If you remove either player from their offense, they don't have the success they had a year ago. Because of the success Derrick Henry had, because of the success that Cook had, it took pressure away from the quarterbacks. And both quarterbacks, Ryan Tannehill and Kirk Cousins, put up real good numbers, played exceptionally well because they had a reliable running game to rely on, and that took pressure away from the passing attack. So I applaud Pete for being able to eat some humble pie, not just a slice, the entire pie, and have two running backs in the top 20. But I have an issue because I believe Dalvin Cook should be higher than at the 19th spot. And if you had Derrick Henry in the top 10, Pete, I would be okay with that as well.
He's taken up for his Seminole. Of course he is. B-Mac, any Seminole.
Either one
the both of them would take up for any Seminole. Put them up in the top 10. They all belong there. They haven't won in about 8 years at Florida State. Put them all in the top 10.
Wow, that's what we're doing? Okay.
No, as far as the running backs, look, you guys know I just don't think there's great value in them, but they've earned the right to get into that spot. And again, this is kind of forward-looking. A year from now, who knows? They might not be in the top 15, 20 players in the league because running backs go off a cliff quicker than other guys do.
All right, let's talk about another quarterback here. We got Justin Herbert, Offensive Rookie of the Year, coming in at 38. He is the 8th quarterback on this list. He is behind Mahomes, Rodgers, Brady, Wilson, Allen, Watson, Jackson. That's 7. I did the math correctly. He is ahead of Dak Prescott, Matt Ryan, Matt Stafford, Kyler Murray, and Danny, you say this is way too high for Justin Herbert. Why?
As much as I like Justin Herbert, only 1 year in a very small body of work. I need to see how this, it's the same conversation we have against about every young rookie quarterback. Lamar Jackson comes in his first year playing, or any first year starter. You want to see what happens when defenses make adjustment to their style of play. How will they adapt to the longevity factor? Can they sustain that level of success? And some of the quarterbacks that were ranked behind him, and you mentioned a few of those, I think if you had a draft of players you would take ahead of Justin Herbert, I think there's a few that you would take there. Now, I think he's close to, he had an 8th overall as far as the quarterback list there. I'd say he's probably closer to 15 or 16 as far as rankings in the NFL of where the quarterbacks fall. So I love Justin Herbert, love the upside there. For me, you just have to prove it more than one season to be this high on a list.
That is ridiculous. He will be a top 10 player on this list next year. He's that good. And Danny, which guys behind him would you take before him if you drafted? Which quarterback?
Did you have Lamar Jackson behind him?
Yeah, you would take Lamar. No, Lamar Jackson wasn't behind him, but who would you take? Which of those guys would you take behind him?
Oh, I would take Dak Prescott and Matt Ryan over him.
No,
and
you
Kirk
wouldn't.
Cousins,
No,
and
you
Kyler
wouldn't.
Murray,
Oh,
and maybe Joe Burrow.
Danny,
Your guy. There's about 4 or 5 I would
Didn't you
take
play
over him that have
quarterback? Didn't you play
sustained
quarterback
success.
in this league? You mean, obviously you don't watch him anymore. I mean, come on, Danny.
You're crazy for the run that you've had of some of those guys. Your guy, even Joe Burrow, if you were going to take a rookie, weren't you higher on him? But aside from that, Dak, I would take over him. Even Matt Ryan for the next 3 or 4 years, I would take over him because you've seen more longer sustained success. And I'm actually excited to see what he does with Kyle Pitts this year.
Wow. It got intense.
Gotta sustain it. Gotta sustain the success. 1-year wonders happen all the time. And you did mention my career. I was a 1-year wonder, so I'm harder on guys. I need to see them last longer than just a year of play.
All right, B-Mac, I want to toss this to you, and either you can follow up on that, but I also want to ask you about this. Just taking a look at Pete's top 10 here, specifically when it comes to the quarterbacks. B-Mac, what is your biggest issue with Pete Prisco's top 10?
The top 10, I talked about Travis Kelce, and quarterback, just quarterbacks alone. Josh Allen. Josh Allen barely got in the top 10. That's an issue for me. Secondly, Lamar Jackson should be higher than Deshaun Watson, and here's why. We don't even know if Deshaun will play this season. Now, based on what I've been told from Pete Prisco, the way he puts together this list is based on what they did last year and the expectations coming into the upcoming season. So the expectations for Deshaun Watson right now, there's no expectations because we have to wait and see. So to have Deshaun Watson above Lamar Jackson, I know it's only 6 spots. I would have Lamar Jackson ahead of Deshaun Watson based on the unknown because of his legal issues. I think Lamar Jackson should be higher. He's not higher, but when you look at all the quarterbacks in totality, that would probably be my biggest issue with the list with the quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson should be higher, and I would have Deshaun Watson behind Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I thought Deshaun Watson was a little too high on this list as well. Obviously, Pete's not high on Dak Prescott because I would have had him above Herbert too. But you look at Lamar Jackson, I would have had him over Deshaun Watson with the MVP that he's got next to his name. I know it's not the style of play and he needs to take that next step. If the Ravens would give him a receiver, maybe we'd get to see that. But I think if you create a nightmare scenario for defensive coordinators, I think they can figure out Deshaun Watson. Lamar Jackson, they're still struggling with trying to figure out that answer. So I thought Deshaun Watson, similar to you, was a little bit high on this list.
The guy led the league in passing yards last year. You know, the idea is for the quarterback to throw the football. Which one throws the football better, Deshaun Watson or Lamar Jackson? It's simple. I understand he's got some legal issues that need to be remedied and see if he's going to be on the field. But as of right now, he's a member of the National Football League, which is why I rate.
All right, I'm going to put pause on this for just a second, guys, because we're going to talk about much more coming up. Because speaking of quarterbacks, there is somebody missing from this list, glaringly missing, Baker Mayfield. What Danny and B-Mac have to say about that next. So here's the thing. Can't really argue, Pete Prisco, that Baker Mayfield has helped turn the Browns around. In fact, I was listening to the Pick Six podcast today, and you had Will Brinson actually touting Baker Mayfield as a dark horse to potentially win MVP. At least he finds value in the odds there, 35-1. The Browns this past season making it to the playoffs for the first time since 2002. Their first playoff win since 1994. So who else were some notable misses from Pete Prisco's top 100? Well, yes, Baker Mayfield did not make the list, as did teammate John Johnson there. You see Quinnen Williams, Josh Jacobs, Mekhi Becton, Amari Cooper, Ryan Tannehill. So let's see what the guys have to say about this. Let's welcome back Danny Kanell, Bryant McFadden here. Of course, Pete Prisco breaking down Pete Prisco's top 100. So somebody not in that top 100, Baker Mayfield. Why not?
I had a tough time with him, and I had him in and moved him back out again, and I just looked at the list and I saw so many quarterbacks in there, and I have to see it again from him for another year. And everything they do in that offense is predicated off the run game. They really make it easy on him. I'm a big Baker Mayfield guy. In fact, I predict he'll be on this list next year. I really do, because I think they're going to be a really good team, and pushing forward, they have a ton of talent, and if they're not going deep into the postseason, then something went wrong. So I do think he'll be on the list next year. I had him on the list, moved him out, moved him back in, moved him out a couple different times, and in the end, I just didn't put him on there.
You're wrong,
Man,
Pete. You're dead wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. I'm sorry, Danny. I was fired up. I was ready for this. You know, I'm fired up about this one, because I don't usually, say a lot of positive things about Cleveland Browns, but I got to be unbiased. Baker should be on this list, and here's why. He played some of his best football towards the end of last season. I mean, the last 6 ball games of the regular season in 2020, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. In the postseason, almost 500 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, 1 interception. So the momentum that he has going into this season, not to mention year 2, finally being a part of a structured offense. Baker Mayfield, if he continues to stay focused and dialed in, he's going to ball out once again. His offense will be extremely good, like they were, especially towards the latter part of last season. So just because of his numbers alone and how he finished the regular season and played in the postseason should warrant Baker being on this list. And lastly, for me, if you're going to have Joe Burrow on this list and not Baker Mayfield, Pete, you are dead wrong. Joe Burrow played half of the season. When he was out there, he balled out. No doubt about it. A season-ending injury did not allow him to finish the year. And coming into this season, we still have reservations on how healthy he will be. Because if he's not 100% healthy, I do not expect to see some of the outstanding numbers that we saw from Joe in his rookie campaign. So for you to have another AFC quarterback in your top 10, in your top 100, outside of Lamar Jackson, and that guy be Joe Burrow over Baker Mayfield, yes, you're dead wrong. And that's the biggest issue I have with players that are left off this list, is not having Baker Mayfield in your top 100.
Totally agree with you, B-Mac, and I think you point out something really good, because we just heard Pete say he needs to see another year out of Baker Mayfield, but all he needs to see is 10 games out of his guy, Joe Burrow. And to me, it is about the 3 years that we've seen of Baker Mayfield and the ups and downs that he's been able to survive. We saw an incredible rookie year, then we saw a massive setback in the second year with 22 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, an entire offseason of people questioning him, criticizing him, wondering if he was going to be the guy. The ability to respond to that criticism and come back with a season like he had this past season, 11-5 record, 30 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, that resiliency, to me, shows why Baker should be on this over a rookie in Joe Burrow, who, yes, I think he's going to be fantastic, but we don't know. We don't know how he's going to be coming back from that ACL injury. We don't know how he'll be long-term, withstanding criticism from the critics and fans and getting booed. We know that Baker Mayfield now can survive and thrive in that environment, which I think is a big battle for young quarterbacks to overcome. And the fact that Baker Mayfield's done that already shows me he deserves to be on it this year.
Let me ask these guys one quick question. What is the key to the Cleveland Browns offense? What dictates if they have success or not in that offense?
In every offense,
it's
always the quarterback.
In that
offense. It's always the quarterback.
Pete, can I answer this question for you, Pete?
Go ahead.
The ground and pound attack dictates the success in Cleveland Browns offense. And you can say the same thing about Minnesota, but you got Kirk Cousins on your list. The ground and pound attack in Minnesota dictates the offensive success, primarily for Kirk Cousins, but he's on your list.
He had a better year than Baker Mayfield last year. Look at his touchdown numbers. He threw 35.
He had a few more touchdowns. Baker, I think, threw 28. He had 28 touchdowns.
He had a
27.
better season than Baker Mayfield.
He had a few more touchdowns.
And believe me,
but
I'm not a big Kirk Cousins guy like Danny is, and I know Danny loves Kirk Cousins, but I put him on the list because he earned the right to be there. 35 touchdown passes. Look at the yards per attempt, 8.3. That tells you he was driving the ball down the field. They're different in what they do a little bit. I get it. They both want to run that zone scheme and then throw off of that. But Baker Mayfield's run scheme last year was outstanding. He has 2 offensive linemen in the top 100. He could have a couple more this year. You could make a case for Jack Conklin at right tackle, Jedrick Wills at left tackle, and Treader the center. The entire offensive line could be in the top 100 next year.
All right, this is what Danny and B-Mac think. We did ask on social media, on Twitter. You can still go weigh in there. The biggest snub in Pete Prisco's top 100 is 41.7%. Baker Mayfield coming in at number 1. Marshawn Lattimore coming in at number 2. Then James Bradbury, followed up by Josh Jacobs. I'm hearing B-Mac in my ear. Would you like to say something, my friend?
Yeah, I highlighted Baker Mayfield. I'm glad, you know, the folks that chimed in, they're rocking with me. But James Bradbury is another name that's left off this list. James Bradbury balled out for the Giants. Giants fans need to stand up and attack Pete Prisco like the Steeler fans did last year when he left Micah Fitzpatrick off his list. And I'm so happy to see you have Micah on your list because, ooh, Steeler Nation ready to attack you once again. But James Bradbury, 44 tackles, 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 8 PBUs. He was second in the NFL in that stat, tied for second. You got Darius Williams, who played real good football opposite of Jalen Ramsey. But guess who he was covering? Most opposing offenses' number 2 guy, because Jalen follows the number 1 guy. You know who follows the number 1 guy for the New York Football Giants? James Bradbury. And then you have L'Jarius Sneed, the talented young corner from Kansas City, who I love. I love his game. But you have him in your top 100, 31 tackles, 3 interceptions, only 7 PBUs. James Bradbury has better numbers than Sneed. James Bradbury basically has better numbers or right there with Williams, and he follows the opposing offense's number 1 pass catcher. And last year, he pretty much locked them down. So to have James Bradbury left off your list is a total issue for me outside of Baker. Baker's my number 1. That's my number 1 gripe. My number 2 gripe, Bradbury. You got to be on the list. Giants fans attack Pete right now.
I really thought he was going to get mad at me because I put his cousin on the list. I didn't expect James Bradbury to be fire up B-Mac.
I didn't want to be too predictable because when I saw that, I said, oh, I know what Pete's thinking already. I'm going to attack him because Pat Pete's not on the list. But I didn't want to be predictable. So I came from a different angle. I didn't come from the strong side of the blitz. I came from the weak side blitz.
And by the way, I've had Patrick Peterson high on this list for many years. He did not play to that last year. And knowing Patrick Peterson the way I do, he'd probably be the first one to admit it.
All right, Pete Prisco, thank you so much. By the way, go after Pete on Twitter. He loves it. He may block you, but he loves it. Speaking of Patrick Peterson and Bryant McFadden, if you didn't know, they have a podcast. It is awesome. All things covered. Make sure to download and follow. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.